Okay.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, shall we get this party started? We've got a kind of just the hardcore people who want to hear about graduate research coming to our session. I think there are a lot of really exciting panels that are going on at the same time. So we're glad that you all have chosen to participate in this session. And I'm sure there are some others who might watch this session from the recording. And so I am Robin McGill. I am the Deputy Director of Academic Affairs at the Alabama Commission on Higher Education. And I am really delighted to be here with colleagues that I know from the Alabama Council of Graduate Deans. Dr. Harold Pardue is from the University of South Alabama. Dr. Lilian Mina is from the University of Alabama at Birmingham. And Dr. Bristol is joining us from Alabama State University. And as we go through their remarks, I'm sure they'll tell you more about the many manifold hats that they wear, because that's how graduate deans are. And also, of course, our discussion today will be about the use of AI in graduate research. I'm going to start by inviting Dr. Mina to tell us about what has been going on at UAB. And for those who heard me say that there was a handout, there is a piece of paper, and I know that there are more papers than there are people in this room. So if you don't have one, it's floating around for you somewhere in the back. You can refer to it, but if not, there's certainly availability on their website. And take it away, Dr. Mina.
Thank you so much, Robin. Thank you for being here. And just to start by correcting a very tiny thing, I am not a graduate dean. I'm an associate dean at the graduate school. So just to clarify that. Okay, so in front of you, you will see the guidelines on using AI in graduate research, like graduate research projects like capstones, theses, and dissertations. Quick context about how this document was produced. Early in the summer, late spring, the graduate dean and myself met with some of the graduate program directors, and they asked for some guidelines from the graduate school about the use of AI in these projects. Because UAB has been doing a lot of work on AI, and the guidelines they published on research were mostly for either the health side and the medical side of the university, understandably given how UAB is health focused and the medical school, and some guidelines for faculty on the research and publications and grants and things like that. There was nothing for graduate students, and graduate faculty were starting to think, what exactly should we do about this? So what we did was the dean reached out to all the academic deans at UAB and the provost office, and we put together an ad hoc committee representing all the academic schools at UAB, the library, the provost office, and the CIO. We started with a simple charge, just creating some guidelines. The agreement was we were not going to produce any policy because we didn't want to interfere with the disciplinary expertise and expectations and practices of all the graduate programs. So we wanted some guidelines that each graduate director would take it back to their program and see what they can do with it, just a starting point for them to develop their own policies if they wanted to do that. So after the first meeting and the initial conversation, we raised a few questions. The first question was, what are the disciplinary expectations about the use of AI in graduate research? Because again, I'm an English professor. We are a large institution. We have more than 100 graduate programs from certificates, masters, and doctoral. So of course, nobody can claim to know everything about these programs and what they do. The second question, and that was kind of like a sticking point for me personally, was the equity question. And what I mean by equity is fairness and access to these technologies. Basically, if two students are in the same graduate program, but they are working with faculty members or advisors who have completely different attitudes and approaches to the use of AI, both in the research process and in the writing of their thesis and dissertation. My point was, what happens when these two students are conferred the same degree, but under completely different circumstances? One is encouraged and supervised and mentored on the use of AI in the research and in the writing of their thesis or dissertation. The other is completely banned from these technologies and whatever they can learn from these technologies. What does this mean for equity among these students? What does this mean for the validity of our degrees down the road? Another question that we raised was, what's going to happen few years after these students graduate? Some of them have used AI, supervised and mentored by their supervisors, but nobody knows about that kind of use outside of their graduate committee. What if somebody down the road says, oh, you used AI in your research, in your dissertation, sorry, we cannot let you teach with us, we cannot let you continue to work for us because that was unethical. So there were a lot of questions and concerns that came up in our first meeting as a committee, and I asked all my colleagues to take these questions back to their academic departments and see what they're going to say about this. Fast forward to beginning of August, when we started having a draft that ended up being the document in front of you. Among like we talked about, of course, each department is going to determine how AI is used or not used in both the research process and the writing, because until that moment, many people were just thinking about AI as Gen AI in terms of ChatGPT and Claude and like just helping with the writing process and polishing and things like that. But there was another aspect, which is the research process. What if the graduate student is interested in using, or there is a room to use different AI technologies in the research process, forming hypotheses, analyzing data, data visualization, synthesis, all these other complex processes that go into writing or doing a thesis or dissertation. And then from the graduate school side, we decided to come up with a disclosure statement that is now required as of like 2 weeks ago, is required to be part of the formatting for all theses and dissertations at UAB. It's going to be next to the approval page. And I'm sorry it's not part of the handout, but I have the QR code. I can share it with everybody later. It's basically a simple statement, and we say that each department can modify it depending on their disciplinary expertise and expectations and practices, and it has 2 sections. You have
on the back.
We have that now, the complete page that's going to go in the formatting of thesis and dissertations. So basically, we are saying the student is disclosing the use of AI in the research and in the writing. And they have to list the technologies they have used and the uses of these particular technologies. And then that disclosure has to be signed by the graduate student, their committee members, and the graduate director. So we are covering all the bases. We ran that language by Office of Counsel at UAB, again, because this is legal responsibility, and they approved the language. So this is where we are right now. We have these guidelines. We heard good feedback on the guidelines from the academic deans once we shared the final document with them, from the provost, of course, council. Some colleagues on the committee told us that their departments are considering using these guidelines as is. Some were starting to think, okay, what does this mean for our specific discipline and what that means for our students? Some, if you heard me talk in the morning session today, some are still resisting completely to anything about AI in research or in writing whatsoever. So last month I gave a talk about mentoring graduate students on their in the age of AI and what does that mean for our role as graduate faculty. So this is a document that we have created. I'm happy to talk more about it, but thank you.
Okay.
And if you have any questions, something I'd like to end with, we don't have all the answers. So we left some questions without an answer because we kept going back and forth, and then we realized that this is a larger conversation than what we could possibly have on an ad hoc committee. So thank you.
All right, thank you. And Dr. Pardue.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Harold Pardue. I'm Dean of the Grad School and Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs, which, as you probably know, if you've been in the role, it's like being an assistant principal. I'm going to take something of a contrarian view, and I told Lilian this morning, and she's like, great. But I want to start, before I do that, I want to start with saying when I first took my role as a vice president, associate vice president, I was chairing a committee on how to write a policy or revise our policy for conflict of commitment. And I discovered their policy repository, UABs, they write great policies. They're easy to find. And so I've come to rely on their repository for a first start. I don't go to ChatGPT. I go to UAB's, repository. So, but
Hold it closer to your mouth.
too close?
Closer.
Closer. Okay.
There
And
you
I'm sorry, I'm a little hoarse. My allergies are killing me today. So my somewhat contrarian. We're just like, we'll have opposite sides here, maybe. I have resisted as an administrator writing standalone policies for AI for two reasons. Number one, I think ultimately the policy is going to be integrated in all the other policies anyway. You're going to have to do that anyway. But all this great stuff is ultimately going to make its way into the 4 or 5 other policies that it impinges on. And so I kind of think, no, let's just go ahead and look at where this really touches the ground, so to speak. And so that's one thing. And then I think, well, that's two part of the first part. The other thing is, I think having a standalone document suggests this is something different. And I want to make the case in just a moment that this is not really different. And so it suggests that AI is this different thing we have to think about instead of being integrated in everything, that it's just a natural evolution. Again, I'm just taking the the other thing, though, at a macro level, my undergraduate is philosophy. I mean, I'm from computing, so I have modest knowledge about computing and machine learning and all that. But my training was philosophy. And so if you think about cycles of technical change, if you think about AI as a technology at its highest level, all technologies go through a very typical cycle. You have a technological discontinuity that just upsets the apple cart. Your previous knowledge and skills are obsolete. Think horse carriage to car, automobile, for example. Then you have an era of ferment where everybody's experimenting. They're trying to figure it out. What does it really mean? What is a car? And then at some point, a dominant design emerges. More than 50% of all technology kind of fits that. And then you have a long, very long era of incremental technical change until the next technological discontinuity. So if we think of AI in that way, which is what I'm trying to frame it as, you could go back as far as you wanted for that first technological discontinuity. Maybe Pascal in 1640 or whatever, when he thought, I'm going to build a mechanical calculator, right? But they didn't have the machining they needed to make precision wheels to do addition and subtraction. Maybe that was the beginning. I would say the dominant design emerged in World War II with Alan Turing and the Turing test and all the Neumann machine, all that stuff. And what it really, that was where we said, okay, most of us think of AI this way. That is, it's a facsimile of us. It's not us, but it's a facsimile. And the Turing test is, can you tell when you interact with an algorithm, is it a human or is it an algorithm? And we're not quite there yet, because as you know, we've talked about hallucinations, right? These generative algorithms hallucinate. So we're not quite there, but we're getting pretty darn close. And so the point is, right now we're at a difference of degree, not a difference of kind. What will be a difference of kind in AI? That would be generalized AI, where AI actually thinks for itself. If we think, it could think, right? There's a proof existence for a machine that can think, right? It's between your ears, right? Putting aside the ghost in the machine concept, the gray matter in your head, in your skull, appears to think, right? Sometimes we're not sure about our students, but it appears to think. And so there's a proof existence. That will be a discontinuity. That is, now it's not about us talking about, oh, the ethical use of AI. Now we're talking about some sort of consciousness that has rights, and it can be unethical, right? And that just changes everything. Now it's not just this super genius person that's giving you answers. This person's thinking on its own, and it's a completely different, if you want to call it a life form, it'll be totally different. To me, that will be the next technological discontinuity, where it thinks for itself and it finds answers. Because right now, if one of these algorithms identified a genetic sequence that unlocked the secret of a disease, it wouldn't know, in air quotes, right? One of us has to know, right? Or if you're a history major, historian, and it finds this thread in a big a body of literature that explains a social construct that nobody quite understood, the algorithm wouldn't know it. It would take someone with classical training or whatever to understand. So the point is, what I think is we should frame as administrators, thinking at the high level, if we're trying to create policies and guidance, and not, it wasn't a policy, these were guidelines, we ought to think about how this fits in what we already know, right? I kind of think of it as a dean of the grad school, I think of AI as a potential committee member. So how is it any different to use ChatGPT or one of these other large language models? How is it any different than hiring a statistician to do my data analysis? I sat in the basement of Florida State looking at microfiche, getting motion sickness when I did my literature reviews, right? I don't have to do that anymore. Is it unethical to use ChatGPT? I would say it's not any different than would it be unethical than for me to hire someone to do it? And it is unethical maybe to hire someone to do it, but not the statistician. I don't know. But my recommendation is we don't think about this as being so dramatically different, but look at what we already have, find those policies and tweak them, like academic misconduct. There was some push to have an AI academic misconduct policy. But at the end of the day, how is it any different than paying someone to write your paper? It's still the same issue. You got unauthorized assistance. And so we tweaked our policy to incorporate this new technology. So to summarize, again, I admire UAB a lot for their, but in my opinion, I think as administrators, we should resist right now creating standalone documents. We should go ahead and assume it's here. It's a difference of degree. We already know probably how this is going to impact things, like education. A theme today was, how is it going to transform education? Well, now ChatGPT, if you think about it, is a lot like Plato. Plato knew just about everything of the known world at that time, and people sat around at his knees and learned. I mean, he was like ChatGPT out of the time, and that educational model exists, right? It's not like we're going to have to make something up. Humans learned when Plato knew everything, right? And so my view is we should think about this in a slightly different way. I'm not saying that generative models is a parlor trick. It's extremely impressive, but it's still just an algorithm and it's not thinking. So, Rena?
Thank you for, of course, our disruptive thoughts. Now, Rena. Are you going to play something on your phone? Is that okay?
I haven't.
And while
I
she's,
have my audio down. Hang on.
and Rena's disciplinary background is music, so.
2001: A Space Odyssey. I couldn't help myself. She was talking about technology that could think for itself. Yes, I'm always good for a tune related. You know, a piece of music always. I think my mic's on. There we go. Hi, I'm Rena Bristol. I'm at Alabama State University. I'm assistant provost and dean of the graduate school. And yes, as Robin pointed out, my disciplinary background is music. So as I was sitting here listening to my colleagues, I was jotting some notes. Something else I've learned from our students: always have your phone so you can take some notes. I think that's great. So our students are teaching us a lot, right? They're the ones to first really kind of discover AI in the classroom environment. At Alabama State, the first reaction was, oh no, the sky is falling. The students will have a new way to cheat. But we held off a little bit and said, let's wait and see how this is going to really be used. I think that a lot of faculty didn't realize that the students had been using it already. The students keep things to themselves. They don't want us to know. So we do have a policy, but the policy is a little bit, it's got these kind of guidelines. It's baked into the policy that disciplines can, individual faculty can in fact have their own policy in their syllabus and outline what they can do in AI and not, because we didn't want our technology degrees, anything rooted that has, our computer science, computer information systems. I see one of my colleagues, Ken Leobis here, applied technology. Those programs, even in, they need to have access and use it. From a graduate school perspective, one of the things that I actually realized quite quickly was, I don't know. I actually have to go back and speak with our microbiology and our biology faculty about this and forensic science. If the students are doing data analysis using these technologies in these open systems, that could be a problem because they actually embargo their theses data for grants and other reasons. So, when they submit it to ProQuest, they embargo the data. So I don't know if our students are out there doing that. And that's something, actually just listening to you all talk, that's just a practical consideration for these students. And a lot of us don't think about it. And that's something coming out of the arts I'm not thinking about too much because we don't tend to embargo our research. I think the equity across disciplines, your comments about that was really important, but thinking about what you said too, Harold, about these thinking models. I'm at an HBCU, and what we know a lot of times about tech models of any kind is that they tend to be driven by white male voices. That's research is proving that we don't, there was a lot of that kind of research. So I'm concerned that these models are also being driven in that same direction. And how does that impact the students that I serve at my campus, right? So where are the diverse voices in these systems, and what can we do to improve them? I think that's going to be a really important thing for us to consider as we move forward. I'd like to talk a little bit. I am pro use of AI for helping students to write and improve things, do a literature review. I actually know that feeling, Harold. Yes, indeed. I'm of the same era. And so one of the things that Council of Graduate Schools, they've been very concerned about is time to degree. That a lot of doctoral students will sit in doctoral programs and linger forever and get, just really close to finishing. And I'm wondering how, if we encourage use of AI, can we get students closer to completing degrees sooner and get them in the workforce where they're actually earning money? Because these students are racking up a lot of debt and other things like that. And so the extent to which AI might be able to help us with that, I think is really going to be valuable. And I have to password myself in. I think too, the thing, we're talking about it as dealing with our current environment. We have to remember that the students who are in undergraduate education right now and out in the workforce that might be coming to our graduate programs are using AI. They're going to be accustomed to it. And so when they come to us and we are saying, oh, no, that's not going to be a very successful educational environment for those students. So we might also want to think about how are our undergraduates using it before they come to us, because they are using it. So that's kind of some of my thoughts. The other thing it was funny when we were getting ready for this, I just went to ChatGPT and asked AI to generate some questions about how AI might be impactful in graduate education. And it came up with a great list of questions, and I sent them out to the team here, and we were all really happy. We're not using them, but it was a great exercise. And I'm starting to do that with everything, like in my role as assistant provost, what about this? In my role as graduate dean, what about that? I use those kind of prompts all the time just to help get my thoughts going. And I think that if we train our students to do that, that will also help them. In those early days, we've all got doctorates. Remember trying to figure out what's your topic of this paper or
tyranny of the blank page.
Yes. And just to have some ideas, I would have loved it, but that's me, So thank you for inviting me and for listening to my comments today.
Yeah. So we were kind of toying as we were putting together this panel about whether the audience would have lots of ideas and questions. And we've got, a cozy group in here today. So before we just, carry on talking amongst ourselves, I thought this could be a great chance for y'all who are in the room to ask about the document that you have or to share some about what's going on at your institutions or specific things. If you're a graduate student that you're thinking, gee, I really wish my faculty member would address this. All right, I see a hand. Yes, Dr. Chowdhury. Chowdhury.
Promise Charlotte I would ask questions. And Lilian knows this is coming. So, Ron Chowdhury with the University of South Alabama. Thinking about university structures and graduate student pathways through degree programs, they're often constrained by disciplinary boundaries of some kind. How does graduate education start to reimagine it itself such that it's more possible, more blessed by AIC, I guess, so that, regardless of the particular disciplinary background, that in fact integrated multidisciplinary approaches to graduate education are going to be easier to get done.
Okay, I'll take one crack at it since you mentioned AIC. And I also know that this question came up a little bit in the panel that you were leading earlier about research. And there was an example given by the physicists at UA who said, hey, my colleagues in modern languages came to me with this huge problem that they didn't have the technical expertise to solve, but they had a huge amount of data and we put it in the system and it, basically solved their problem of being able to read manuscripts from back in the day that have never been machine read before. And somebody called for an interdisciplinary degree that could potentially measure these. And I wrote it down. And I will say that AIC does review new program proposals. And our current philosophy for that is thinking about what does the market need. But we also know that there are jobs that don't exist in the labor market demand and statistics. And so those kinds of, when you're bringing together multiple things and it looks interesting, we are open to that. We're not gonna try to close the door on that, especially when it can link multiple different fields together and kind of cross-cut. In fact, those are the ones that I love getting up to our commission and saying, hey, this one is really cool. There's this partnership going on. So I hope that it will materialize. So I will plant my flag and say AIC is not going to be the barrier for that one. Yeah. But what's a colleague say?
Yeah, so I think it was addressing it to me directly, but that, it's not, I feel obliged to answer. But no, genuinely, I think if you think about a couple of aspects of graduate education, number one, it's not as bound as undergraduate, half gen ed, all that kind of stuff. And so it tends to be more specialized already. But what's the biggest, I've had many experiences with interdisciplinary programs. And what's one of the biggest challenges? You have to be a Renaissance person. The chemist says, you don't know thermal transfer or whatever, right? And then the computer scientist says, you can't program in an assembly. And so the art student's saying, well, how would I know how to program in assembler, right? And so it may very well be that if ChatGPT and Plato had to deal, I keep going back to the Socratic method, but it just strikes me, there's a corollary there. Plato had to deal with this. Everybody kind of had to be a Renaissance person. And, maybe ChatGPT can bring the magnitude of what we know down to a targeted enough level that we can be a Renaissance person, at least in your little interdisciplinary degree, right? As an artist, maybe I can kind of understand the transfer process, right? And then maybe the engineer can understand voice as it's defined by literature. Maybe ChatGPT can shrink it down to be like the Socratic method, maybe a grad, because you have to be at a pretty high level cognitively to do this. And so grad school may very well be the place that we get back to the classic way of learning. You're at the, and then the teacher would then be the facilitator, if you will. They're organizing the prompts. Maybe they're the prompt engineer for the class, because that's what it takes, right? At least right now. Who knows what it'll be like in 2 years, but right now you have to be a good prompt engineer. And maybe that's the skill a grad faculty needs. If you're gonna do art, engineering, and chemistry, or computing and chemistry, or whatever, ionic liquids, maybe that, and then you're gonna visualize ionic liquids and you're trying to come up with a new alternative fuel or energy source or a storage device, whatever, maybe. Is that?
Thank you for your question. I don't claim that we are doing much interdisciplinary work at the graduate level yet, but first, I think we need to distinguish two things when we're talking about AI. If you look at the document, you'll see that we don't use anything about Gen AI because we are talking about AI technologies broadly defined, because Gen AI and ChatGPT and Claude and kind of like Copilot are more large language models, but we have a lot of other AI technologies that can be used for more advanced and more sophisticated processes than just generating text or answering questions. And these are the ones we were targeting in these guidelines because we understand that business, computer science, engineering, some of the health focused disciplines are doing much work with AI technologies, not Gen AI technologies. These are distinct types of technologies that we need to keep in our mind while talking about AI. We did not mention anything about Gen AI because we are not just focused on somebody's or some kind of technology spitting out answers to us and to our students. The second thing about graduate education reinventing itself and reimagining its role. One thing we started talking about, and we hope to do more of that in the coming months, is talking to graduate faculty about what our roles will be like in the age of AI. We cannot continue to do our work in terms of teaching, mentoring, supervising graduate students in the research in the same way we've been doing for the last, I'm not gonna say 10, 20, 15, the last couple of years. We need to rethink our roles. We need to rethink our approaches, how we talk to graduate students, and how to invite graduate students to the table for these kind of conversations. Because, and this is something I talked to graduate faculty about last month, we cannot exclude our graduate students from these conversations that squarely affect their career and employability and their learning and how we're preparing them for what's next, whether they are going into academia, industry, science, research, whatever they're gonna do. So we're not distinguishing, or we're not isolating or separating graduate research projects from what graduate faculty need to think about. And if you look at the last page of that document, you'll see that we have guidance for both graduate students and graduate faculty as part of the guidelines. So we're not just asking faculty to think about how AI technologies will be used, but what kind of training and guidance these graduate programs are going to offer for both faculty and students. And these conversations that have to be more inclusive of everybody about graduate education and graduate research. I don't know if this answers your question, but.
Yes, go ahead.
Specific question about like this policy, and this may be like getting like too in the weeds or anything of that nature, but what if or has there been an instance of like any type of remediation of a committee member or anything of that nature who is, having instances of, not necessarily agreeing with the use of AI or anything of that nature, and having to like reorganize committees or anything of that nature.
So what tensions is it kicking up? Yeah.
Nature, because of the use of AI on a certain capstone or thesis project.
So number one, this is not a policy. These are guidelines, and that was the agreement with the graduate directors from the very beginning. Second, the representatives from academic schools on the committee were speaking mostly not for themselves, but for their academic school as a whole, like their college. So they were not representing their own voice. And my assumption, based on the conversations we had at the committee, that these members were nominated by their academic deans. So most probably the dean suggested somebody who has some level of understanding and or practice when it comes to AI technologies before they put their name for that committee. No, we did not have any tension about whether AI is allowed or not allowed, because again, we are leaning more on the disciplinary expectations and practices and expectations and workforce and whatnot. That's why we keep hammering that language repeatedly in the document, because, and actually, when one of the academic deans came back to us at the final stage of feedback and said, why don't you have some specific policies for us to use and to implement? It's like, I'm sorry, I have no idea what your discipline does with AI. So you don't expect a committee of 15 people with only one person from your academic discipline to tell you what you're going to do about this. You're the experts. Take these points and see what you can do with them and how you can marry these points with what your discipline says, and then go from there.
Yeah. I actually kind of have a question, and this can be anybody. I have not in the graduate school had any challenges by faculty, charges of plagiarism or anything like that, of, academic misconduct in writ large in the use of AI. Has anybody else experienced that?
Yes.
Yes,
I
you
see
did.
some nods. Uh-huh.
And that's by the faculty.
Yeah.
So you just followed your institutional policy on academic misconduct at that point?
We handle all of that through our Dean of Students office, and they investigate, and our policy is very broad.
Mhm.
Do you agree? Very broad. So it depends on a lot of things based on what the faculty has in their syllabi, what their program has as their guidance.
Right, and I think that gets back a little bit to your point about equity, is maybe that, and maybe it was very clear that they just put the item in ChatGPT and it spit out all of this, but yeah, that's very interesting to me to see how that's played out. You shook your head too.
So somehow have a corner of South Alabama folks in the room. And, but, our policy is there is no policy. So you put each individual professor has
Yeah, ours too.
So is addressed one way or the other, whether you're allowed, whether you're not allowed. For those that specifically say they're not allowed, we have seen a big use of ChatGPT coming in, and then Harold's also getting involved. Harold has a nice responsibility of dealing with that. So we are seeing that. I wouldn't necessarily say in a thesis or dissertation level, but in practical assignment.
Yeah.
And so that's been where we've seen some problems. And again, it's professor specific. And again, we're trying to be very clear, and maybe even, to the assignment level of, especially the people that do allow it, they may allow it only in certain scenarios. And so, being very explicit in maybe each assignment is maybe helps from that aspect. That really is the problem.
I was just going to add one quick thing. One of the things I had not expected. A student has pointed out double standard because the student's accusing the faculty of using AI to grade the assignment, and the faculty said, "Well, you used AI. Well, you used AI to grade it." And so I've got this sort of.
So that's a very good point, because, and a very good question, because at the beginning of the committee work, some people wanted to discuss the academic integrity ramifications if something like this happens. And then UEB has a very strong and specific code for academic integrity that goes across the university. We have an academic integrity coordinator at each of the academic schools and the graduate school. I'm the one for the graduate school who handles all the academic integrity cases in each school. Earlier, before the committee did its work, we were dealing with a case. It was in a classroom. We haven't dealt with anything at the thesis or dissertation level yet. We don't know what's going to happen next week. And it was in the graduate school, so I advised the faculty member to not use any AI detection tools in order to build that case, because since UAB doesn't use any specific tools, authorized tools, then they would be just poking holes in the case to start with. They took my advice, they talked to the student, and they reached an kind of agreement on that's away from just like documenting the case and more pedagogically sound and appropriate for that student. Based on these two cases and the fact that our academic, our code of academic integrity is very strong and very detailed, we decided that we will use the same code for students' research. Right now, UAB, as I've heard recently, is finalizing the purchase of the Turnitin AI detection tool, to my dismay. And I voiced my concern about that very strongly. And we are concerned that some faculty might take the easy way and just put the entire thesis or dissertation through that tool, which jeopardizes the students' research, data, publishing in the future, like a whole lot of, like lots of cans of lots of worms that can be opened through these tools. So we are just hoping that faculty will use these tools more responsibly so they don't jeopardize students' research and future. But no, we didn't talk about that at all here.
And we've got another.
The assignment. So for instance, I actually want students in some ways to use AI in my course, or try to at least, but I find that maybe there's a new way I can use the material that can even, provide critical thinking. Or so for instance, when our assignments, they have to kind of go through, develop a thesis and do some step-by-steps. So in the past, I just had to submit the assignment on paper or turn it in, but now what they do is present the assignment. So they record themselves, talking about how they came to the thesis, ideas they got in the whole process. And I'm okay with them using the AI actually, but they have to articulate what they did, right? So I think you can, in some ways, when that does happen, and you could tell when students used it, it actually can even, I guess, heighten your awareness on what you've been doing and maybe improve on some of the processes that you've been using. So yeah, we're wasting some time maybe, but I think in some ways it actually helps us as educators to get better at what we're doing.
Oh, yeah. Are you carrying on the same point? Okay, Dr. Han had a question. We'll come back to you.
Yeah.
Thank you, the panelists. I'm from UN. Just to share some of our thoughts. We don't have such guidelines, so I admire UAB for doing this. We're working on something. These are our thoughts. We're working on the ethical use. We didn't say guideline on the use of AI because everybody uses AI, right? That's a fact. No matter people want to confess, say, I think a lot of people, including myself, I use AI a lot. So we want to develop a guideline, something like an ethical use of AI. In our guideline, we also include suggestions for students or anyone provide a log sheet, save your log sheet. We don't say students cannot use AI. You can use AI, but you need it, if controversial or questionable, you can provide a log sheet on the prompts you use. That will help the faculty to know what's the reason, what's the justification you use AI for. You use AI to create work for yourself, or you use AI to come up with a new idea to supplement your research. I think that's something we're thinking. I'm just want to share that with you, and we don't have a guideline yet. I hope we have one.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Are you talking about keeping the log for assignments in a classroom or for research?
Right now, we're in our draft version of guideline, we ask the student to save the log sheets in the classroom. This is for class. Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
And may I amplify my position just as a contrarian? I'm sorry, I'm my kind of horse today. So I think we already have mechanisms in place. You have to pass a comprehensive exam and you have to defend your work in an oral way, right? And so if you didn't do your own work, whether you paid someone to do it or you copied, if you did that, chances are you're going to do a pretty poor job of explaining your work. So if you had ChatGPT do all your work, I kind of think you're going to struggle at the defense, and you probably won't show mastery of your literature in the comprehensive exam. That's I'm getting back to my point. I think this is a difference of degree, not kind. It's easier to access, it's faster, it's more thorough, but I think our policies already exist to handle this, and I'm hesitating to create new rules or policies or procedures when we already have something that'll work. That just
Not creating policy, but I like the guidelines, guidelines to help people better use or.
Agreed. That's why I started my whole thing with, I admire UAB as well. I use their repository. I started with that very statement for that reason.
Rena, did you want to jump in before we go to Dr. Engel?
I like the idea of a log. That's smart. I would have done that just because that would make sense to me. I always want to protect myself as a student. I think, to your point, Harold, the other thing is if a student is using it too much and not to kind of skirt through classes in some ways, some programs don't have theses, but they have intense clinical requirements. And if there's a problem, I think in a clinical program, if the student has skipped really learning the knowledge that they should before they go out and, let's say they're doing clinical mental health counseling and they have a lot of hours that they have to complete and they go out, we haven't started seeing problems, but that might be a place too where we're going to start seeing problems with students who have not mastered, the content and skill knowledge that they need. But on the flip side of that, I can also see, these pass rates in our programs for certain, we have to meet accreditation, licensure pass rates to maintain accreditation. And these technologies are fabulous to help our students build study repositories for themselves. I think 10 years ago, they're still out there, tons of Quizlets that I made for my classes. How many of you ever made a Quizlet, right? Raise your hand. I have a whole, if you took music appreciation or music history with me, they're all out there. So, this technology has actually been there to help students for a while. We just didn't call it AI, did we? We just called them tech solutions. So.
All right, last question.
I was gonna comment on really your issue that you had mentioned about, we're not export control material, intellectual property, whatever we want to call it, and there's different versions of that. So we're looking at that, within our AI committee across campus at South. And there's a lot of universities that have already tackled that, and there's a solution to it. I mean, there's a solution that really exists. It's not, fortunately, it's an expensive resource, expensive solution in that there are ways that you can utilize your own models, or you can utilize filters so that your stuff doesn't go out externally and do that. So that's a big push, but more so I think we're worried about an IP, but again, you got to worry about the export. So that I think has been more important, I think, to some of our researchers, but I can see that now in the same vein of someone writing a thesis dissertation.
Well, I'm also thinking, when students go out and do clinical, if they have to type something up regarding a patient and they use one of those systems and nobody's bothered to tell them, hey, you can't do that.
Well, and so NSF has a policy in place for people who are panel reviewers. And so let's have a problem where people, reviewers were taking a shortcut themselves. So now faculty are doing this as a peer reviewer. And they were uploading these things to public, ChatGPT to write panel reviews. And the problem is they had signed non-disclosure statements, and you've effectively shared that externally. So I think the same, people might not just be aware of it. So I think analysts maybe weren't, oh, I didn't even think of that aspect, it's in the office. And our graduate students may need that same thing.
Harold, do you guys have anything in health sciences for that? South, or even at UAB?
Yeah, they're not allowed to write their
about
SOAP.
those-
Yeah, they're not allowed to use AI for their SOAP notes, but I think they do anyway.
Yeah, I see a hand back in the back and we got a good thing going on here. Come on.
There are budgets. But a lot of these things will probably work for the next 5 years. Ultimately though, we will have to probably go to a couple of radical things. One is controlled environments within which students do work. So for example, programs which run over the internet and in which you type your essay, right? That sort of solution. I think we're moving. You see, if you watch this TV show, Battlestar Galactica, right? They're useful. So the human beings are running from the silence, and to prevent the silence from happening on their networks, what they do is they have no networks, right? And so I think we're gonna have to revisit some manual ways of doing it. Listen, I've been in technology for 30 years, right? I have a PhD in IT and I have 20 certificates in, but so I'm not a lawyer. But what I'm trying to tell you is that ultimately, things like logs, for example, you can ask the AI to generate a log which would match the work that it put out for you, right? Ultimately, we're gonna have to revisit some manual ways of doing these things and some very controlled environments within which they're allowed to do these things.
In the arts, we've been talking about, I joke about it, but we've long been using different technology solutions in oral skills and in music theory classes. And so now it's like, they just need to go back to doing hand manuscript because it just, they're not learning. And Harold, you should appreciate that. Harold's a guitarist, in case you're wondering. So he comes by all this arts integration naturally in his brain. But yeah, we've had a lot of discussions, a lot of those, how many of you have ever used like a sleep at night playlist, help you sleep at night, one of these playlists like on YouTube, you can just, right? Those are all AI generated. Nobody's behind them. These 24-hour channels, they just have algorithms running. And Spotify doesn't even allow somebody who's created one generally to post one because Spotify has AI bots making it for themselves so that they don't have to actually pay anybody for those lists.
Thanks. Okay, now, Dr. Hahn, I saw you trying to get a hand up. Do you have something urgent that you wanted to?
Comment, we do not suggest our faculty should grade student assignment and exam with AI. Yeah.
Apparently it's happening.
Okay. All right, everybody. Well, thank you all for joining us. So at this point, it seems that we are invited to go upstairs to the third floor to a poster session.